Hi, thank you so much for tuning in to TNT, the KCAL kids. I'm Tye Justice.
I'm Todd Fox.
And we're here talking about your favorite memories from the nostalgic 90s and beyond. Now, this is going to be our first episode, but the one thing that we always bonded over was our memories of KCAL Kids. And for those who don't know, KCAL Kids was a early 1990s show about three kids. You know, everybody was trying to be multi-ethnic back then, but three kids who had adventures throughout Disneyland. And in each half-hour installment, you would have three Disney shorts. So in a way, I wanted to talk to you about this. It's kind of the way that The Wonderful World of Color was a commercial for Disneyland back in the 50s when Walt Disney instituted that. It was genius. It's basically, you know, you have adventures in Disneyland and it's just advertising Disneyland. It was an hour-long commercial for Disneyland. And for us, we had the KCAL Kids, which is basically a half-hour show that started at 7 a.m. in the morning during the week. And it would have kids running through Disneyland, having adventures, and watching old Disney cartoons. It was basically a repackaging and an updated version of The Wonderful World of Color and the Disneyland TV show from the 1950s.
It was something like when I attribute it to is back in the day too, around that time period, you had people getting back into I Love Lucy. What was the network on cable that always had
Nick at Night.
Nick at Night was very popular.
Yeah.
This was a regional thing. So this isn't like across the, it's very hard to find now, as we've tried to do, pull up some clips. Yeah. But yeah, it was Jason. I forgot the other two kids, their names. But Jason, I think, was Italian. Then you had
the girl.
But I think the boy was Ryan. He was a white kid. Then you had the girl. She was a black girl.
Right.
And they were like best friends, and they would run around. And sometimes, I didn't go to Disneyland a lot when I was a kid.
Me neither.
But I went there a couple times to know where certain things were. And what was cool about them in between those shorts that you were talking about, they would find different areas that you may not know about. So the next time you go, you're like, oh, I want to check that out because they went here, they had an adventure here, and they would run into certain characters right before the cartoon would start.
That's right, the costume characters.
Yeah.
That's right. And I only went to Disneyland once as a kid.
Okay.
But I didn't go until years after this show. So I went to Disneyland when I was like 8. But the only time I was introduced to Disneyland or actually got to see Disneyland like that was this show.
Yeah.
And that's what introduced it to me. And I mentioned this before, like my affiliation with film has happened since I was a kid. My mom always liked old movies, but she never really loved old cartoons. The first movie she ever gave me was Gulliver's Travels because it was hers. She bought it years ago and then gave it to me, and then I started falling in love with that. But I used to go to my family friend's place in San Bernardino, and they had an ancient, even at that time, top-loading VCR. That thing was a tank. To this day, it probably would still work if they had it. And they had a compilation of Disney shorts, Mickey Mouse shorts. And the shorts, I think, on them were Lonesome Ghosts, Mickey's Amateurs, I think, Clock Tower, where they clean the clock tower, clock cleaners. And this is all stuff from like the 30s, early 40s, and that's like my favorite era. But the first thing I would do was pop that in because I was usually the only kid there. Pop that tape in and watch it and would be enthralled. And when KCAL Kids came along, it was just more of the same for me, and it was a great time, and I loved so much of that. And I would love watching KCAL Kids. I would watch it religiously.
Yeah, it was awesome because again, I could watch the cartoons in the same room if I wanted to with my dad, and that was a time too where you can actually record live television and put on the VCR. So I had a bunch of blank tapes with my dad working at a video store, not a video store, but like a computer place. So he had a lot of blank VHS tapes. So I would take a few of those. I would record the episodes or hit the automatic EP, the timer one, and even get the commercials. I wish I still had those to this day, but those are long gone. But either way, the point is, I would watch those back in the afternoon, and I'd watch them with my mom and dad, and they can relate because those are the cartoons that they grew up on.
Right.
And that's when I started to like Donald Duck because of his attitude, his anger, and then the way you couldn't understand him. And the cartoons were just great too. And then to bring up another point real quick on the kids going through the park, that was around the time Splash Mountain had started. Oh. And I remember that they would go on Splash Mountain a lot. and try to feature that ride.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
And but the funny thing about it was, and I'm sure you're going to get into it, that's an iffy cartoon it's built around.
Oh yeah.
And so they never showed the cartoons related to Splash Mountain on KCAL Kids, but they would always bring around maybe Chip and Dale or Mickey and Donald. Goofy would make an appearance, and they would try to intertwine something that was happening on Splash Mountain to one of those characters and then show their cartoon.
Because for those who don't know Splash Mountain, I believe it was Splash Mountain, it was a Song of the South ride.
Correct.
And Song of the South was a 1946 Disney feature film, which did half animation, half live action, but it intertwined the two. And Disney did that every once in a while. The Reluctant Dragon they did that with. But on this scale, it was really good, and something like that really wasn't done again until Who Framed Roger Rabbit,
Mary Poppins was the first one, right? And then it was those adaptations.
No. First it was Song of the South was in the 40s.
Okay, that was the first one. Okay.
I think Mary Poppins was in the 60s.
Okay, got it. Towards the end.
Yeah, exactly. So they did that kind of stuff, but this movie really integrated it to a point where it was really intense. But that was the first time they went full force into it. Most people don't know that was a Song of the South ride, because that movie was relatively popular. It was based on slave stories that are taken by a white writer and passed off as his own, the Uncle Remus tales. But it became extremely controversial, and they secretly have swapped it out and made it a Bayou. They've made it a Princess and the Frog ride now. Mm-hmm. But before Brer Fox, Brer Rabbit were from that film, and it was so controversial, it was never released on home video here in the United States, and it is not on Disney Plus, and it will never be.
Yeah.
The only places they released it were in the UK, Ireland, which is the highest quality version, and I'll get to that, but also in Japan had a laserdisc released in 85 and 90, and I have the 90, the last stereo sound release of it. But the higher quality one was Beta, which VHS unfortunately beat out, but Beta was higher quality. But there was a Beta rental tape in Ireland, I think, around that space, that it was PAL. It was PAL version, which is 25 frames a second. But that is technically the highest quality version you can get on home video. Now, since then, you've had 16 and 35 millimeter prints, which I have a Blu-ray copy of, which you can find.
Quite the collection, by the way.
Yeah, I'm big into the research. You know me, I do my research. I try to, but for a long time, people didn't know that's what it was. But it was, again, one of those things we were introduced to because of KCAL Kids, and it looked like they were always having so much fun. It was, even as a kid, I'm like, this is a little corny, but it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, just for the most part, most of the time they would hang out. I mean, they would go to Frontierland, other places like that, Tomorrowland, stuff like that. But they would mostly hang out downtown, Main Street, like I said, Splash Mountain and stuff like that. And they'd always do cool things. And they were corny now. If you look at them, you're like, wow, I was into that. But at the time, you're like, man, that is cool. I want to do that. And you're absolutely 100% right. It was a freaking commercial for Disney in general, to go to Disneyland, to beg your parents to go. And if I gotta say one thing, that was one of the things I guess we'll get into maybe on another episode, but talk about the golden age of cartoons with Disney, the part 2. And that was right in the middle, and it was genius to bring back the old stuff too. So while we're in the mix of all these great Disney films coming out and cartoons, and then all these wonderful weekday afternoon cartoons, we have a taste of the old school, what started it. And it's, man, I loved it. I absolutely loved tuning in to see the old cartoons, because it was, and if you look at the animation in general to some of these freaking shorts, it's beautiful. Yeah. Because the detail of the era that it was in is fantastic. You can look at some of the homes in the background of that one with the apartment where they had moving day. Where you look at moving day and you're like, okay, look at those garages are from like the late 30s, early 40s, and it's just everything you could. As you get older, you can look at the details and you're like, man, they really put the time and the effort into it. Not only with the characters and the voices, but everything. No, for sure. And I've said this before, but the Disney shorts were my favorite Disney output of all time. Even when it came to their features were great. Like I love Disney features, but the core of who I am when it comes to being a Disney fan is
are the shorts because they happened throughout such a specific timeline, the late 20s through the early 1960s is when they finally ended their theatrical short run. But they were such magical pieces of art. And, seen as disposable, but they would make money. They were money makers, and you had to be so talented to be able to make a 7-minute film that had a beginning, middle, and end that was funny, that was poignant, and you had some amazing artwork done in such a short amount of time. And this was the era where they were like working shoulder to shoulder in their first studio before Walt became more of an elitist later on when they moved to their Burbank studio.
Frame by frame,
like they were just there working, sweating it out, and putting out some of their greatest work. And there's a lot of I shouldn't say adult content, but adult-oriented content. It wasn't just made for kids; it was made for adults. And adults love this stuff just as much as kids did because it worked on multiple levels. But they, like you were saying, this was part of their first animated renaissance. So Disney, kind of brought that in, especially because Disney was the first person to use 3-strip Technicolor. See, before 3-strip Technicolor, in 1932's Flowers and Trees. Before that, the only color process they really had that was successful was 2-strip Technicolor, but that wouldn't give you accurate colors. So the silent movie, The Black Pirate, with Douglas Fairbanks Sr., they shot it in 2-strip Technicolor, but the thing is, blue wouldn't come out blue. Green wouldn't come out green. You'd have to estimate certain types of orange and things because it's basically an orange and a green strip put on top of each other to recreate color, like true-to-life color. But you'd have to have different things. So Douglas Fairbanks Sr. had kind of a thick scruff, so he would come out green and 2-strip Technicolor, so they'd have to put magenta makeup on him to neutralize that. And that's how he looked like he had skin tone and not like a green beard growing in. When 3-strip Technicolor came about, nobody wanted it. People were like, 3 strips? It's hard enough and expensive enough with 2 strips. We're not going to do 3. So the 3-strip was magenta, cyan, and yellow. But Walt, halfway through the production of Flowers and Trees, because his cartoons were just black and white at that point, said, no, I'm going to use this, but I get to use it for 3 years exclusively first. And they went, okay. So he had the first exclusive contract with 3-strip Technicolor, and it gave us the lush, rich, beautiful color of shorts like The Band Concert. Again, using color, introducing it to the rest of Hollywood. The strike era is when they did so much of their great work. The war era as well that, fell on top of it. They put out some amazing work. And even their Victory Through Air Power short, because the Army kind of took over, which Walt was not happy about during World War II to make propaganda. But Victory Through Air Power was an animated short that they made for the military that got them to start investing in their Air Force, or the Army Air Corps back then. And that's what's believed to have changed the tide of the war, is American Air Force, air power. So that's attributed to Disney. So throughout all that history, all the tumultuous changes, it's all within the DNA of the short cartoons.
Yeah, I kind of got to start there. I mean, to me, like, the first version of short cartoons is, going to Disneyland. It's always been a tradition of me and my girls where we would go down Main Street and we have to make a right into the Disneyland theater.
Yeah.
And we go in there and it's that little circle thing. A lot of people pass right by it, don't care about it. But it just basically shows the oldest cartoons and the best versions of his early days.
Yeah.
So you see that polo game with all the starters like the, what is it called?
Laurel and Hardy.
Laurel and Hardy.
Yep.
Is it the Marx Brothers or
Marx Brothers?
Clark Gable.
Clark Gable for sure.
Anyway, they're playing polo and they do their drawings. They make fun of their caricatures, but it's great,
Yeah.
and it's you could tell they had fun making it, and and then they have other cartoons on there. Obviously, Steamboat Mickey being the first one,
right? First Sound,
yeah First Sound. And boy, oh boy, and this last time I went to Disneyland, we went in there and we saw the 70th anniversary tribute to Walt Disney, and I learned so much from watching that film, and also listening to Bob Iger talk about it, the animatronics. But and you know what I was thinking, because we were doing this episode, because maybe we could do a breakdown of their most famous shorts. Use an episode, just break it down.
Oh yeah,
in the future, but. When he was talking about all the things that he went through to get to the point that he did, the thing I kept thinking of is, man, this guy wasn't a smoker. As genius as he was and innovative as he was up until the time that he passed in 1966, you're thinking he died at 55, and that's all I could think about was, even if he didn't smoke as much, and he could have lasted another 20 to 25 years.
Yeah.
You're talking now. You're making it into the 90s. In that golden era. What he could have done to elevate Disney even higher. I don't think Eisner and obviously Iger and his family could have took it to the heights if Walt himself was still alive. I mean, I even joked with a friend that was with us. I was like, man, maybe he would have acquired Star Wars earlier.
Well, I know, because that was in the works for a while. But the thing is, Walt, it's funny you say that, because Walt, after he died, after 66, the last film he had anything, to do with directly was The Jungle Book.
Yeah.
And if you notice, after that, Disney had 20 plus years of nothing. I mean, they put out product, they put out films, they put out a couple of animated movies, because I think in the 70s there were 2 animated films.
Yeah.
It was just very dry, and their films didn't really do much. Tron, even though it was innovative and great, was ahead of its time and failed. Black Cauldron didn't do well, even though they had Tim Burton as an animator on it back in the day.
They did more like shows, and
live action.
Yeah, and they kind of went off of books, like Old Yeller and stuff like that.
Yeah, they did things like that, but again, it wasn't, and Old Yeller, I think, was still during Walt's era.
Oh, that's true. Never mind.
Because but again, his hand in it, he had the touch when it came to his product.
Absolutely.
After he died, it was about 20. It wasn't until 1989 with The Little Mermaid and Howard Ashman and that whole crew.
Kind of turned it around.
Yeah, they made hits again. But the funny thing is, in the early 80s, Don Bluth was an animator at Disney too. But he believed that Disney had lost its touch for a long time. And what he did was he took half the animation staff with him and started his own studio and put out things like Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven. And throughout the 80s, they were beating Disney in popularity. People love those films.
Land Before Time, if you look at it now and didn't know where it came from, you'd say it's Disney.
Yeah, that's a Disney style, because he wanted to go back to the Disney style that they used to have.
Yeah, that story still, if I watch it today, still chokes me up.
Dude, All Dogs Go to Heaven, man.
Yeah, that's a great one too.
Oh my God, at the end.
Yeah.
And the tragic story behind that, and the little actress that played, man, well, she also was in both. She was the teacher.
She was Littlefoot, right?
She was Petrie.
Or Petrie, yeah.
She was Petrie.
We did a story on my other podcast, a true crime. We talked about actors that had passed or had been murdered, and she came up and we told her tragic story too. So, yeah, I mean that is the Land Before Time ones, I mean, like you said, those are classics.
Yeah.
And All Dogs Go to Heaven, same thing.
Yeah, it was a trip, but it's funny how his own team was beat. But I mean, that's how controversial their history was in terms of animators back in the day, because they were just not. It was not what it was. But it took, let's face it, 25 years for them to get back up on the horse, and then have their breakout era in the 90s.
Yeah,
where,
in the 90s, it was like
back to
one
back to
hit
back.
after hit.
Yeah, you had Little Mermaid, Aladdin, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback. If you watch it now, is an amazing
It's pretty
film,
good.
and it's really dark.
Yeah.
It's really dark and has a lot of adult themes. And you watch it with different eyes now, but that's back to the Disney magic, to where there was underlying subtext, and it wasn't just surface level. And
Yeah, whereas nowadays, like, say for instance, like something like Gargoyles, which I liked back in the day, is buried. You know, where again, that's something that should be out there more, but it's not.
It's very subculture. There's something about it that's very subculture, and it's like the NECA figure, or the figures that they put out on them, are really cool, and the stories are really cool. You had a black lead as Keith David,
which he was awesome.
Yeah, and he's a great actor in general, but just as in Gargoyles, the whole cast was great.
I mean, I know we're going off topic, but let me just ask you.
Are we though?
Yes,
Are we?
I don't know. I'm trying to tie it all in together, but
we will.
So, like, have you seen the latest, or one of the latest ones that came out a couple years ago, the Chip and Dale, like, live action type cartoon?
That was weird.
Now, yeah, I thought the same thing, because they threw in
not bad, but just weird.
Yeah, they threw in a bunch of characters, but the overall story, except how the Chip and Dale characters wound up at the end, that was really stupid. Right. But everything else, I was just like,
she married the fly?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense, dude.
Sorry.
What the hell is that?
Yeah.
I thought she would have went with one of the boys. Right. But anyway, it just tripped me out though, like how they brought back all the characters, and it was cool for
it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was cool for nostalgia, because I mean, you could be like, oh, I remember that cartoon. I love that character.
Yeah.
And you wonder, it's like, why have they buried these characters for so long? Because the way they are starved in Hollywood, and as far as animation for something new other than SpongeBob and something new other than Bluey.
I'll tell you.
You know, can't we?
I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay, well, let's hear it. Let's hear it, man, because that's my thought.
So I've worked with people that have worked in Disney Home Video and Warner Brothers Archives and things like that. And the problem is all studios hate their core assets. And I say that because we have to remember it takes money, time, and effort to keep these things alive. With things that were shot originally on film, you have to have them transferred onto film. You have to do film-to-film transfers. You have to keep up the negatives, and that all takes space. You have to rent space. You have to keep these up. And, I mean, you have, unfortunately, a lot of times people that run these studio departments, like, let's say, Warner Brothers, Warner Archive. There was a previous president who was famously known in certain circles as saying, who cares about? The only people that care about old movies are old people and gays, but he used the F word, the slur. And
it's always nice.
You know, and he was the one that was in charge.
Yeah.
And he was in charge for years. And it's terrible. Now he's not there anymore. They have people that are curating it much more efficiently and beautifully. I love the Warner Archive, don't get me wrong. But with Disney, I had a friend that worked in home video back when it was one department back in like the late 80s, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason I got into laser discs, because there's certain things on laser discs, especially Disney stuff, that will never come out again.
Yeah, you basically got the only copy.
Right, exactly. The only things that exist. But they themselves did something called the Disney Treasures Collection. And I talk about that every once in a while, but it was basically the chronological release of all the Donald, Mickey, Goofy, Pluto shorts, and some of the things in between. And there's a lot of different sets. But the executives are like, well, it's going to fail. And they just had no respect for what came before, because you got to restore these cartoons. It takes a lot of money to get them into good shape.
Well, it's not like Disney's, rich or nothing.
I know, it's not like they're hurting for money.
Yeah.
But again,
they're struggling.
The curation, because the thing is, what they're going to make on it, because it's been around for so long and people have seen it for so long, for so many years, their whole lives and their parents' lives, and sometimes even their grandparents' lives, that they're not going to sell out necessarily. They want the new thing, they want the new release, the new Toy Story movie that's going to sell all copies. You know what I mean? It's going to look good on their quarterly reports. So when it comes to the more, I don't want to say ancient, but their older stuff, their core assets, again, they're not going to make as much money off of them instantly. So, and again, it takes curation. It takes a lot of things to get it to disc or to stream. And some of the stuff is very, let's face it, controversial now. One of the shorts I was looking for a while was one I grew up with called Mickey's Amateurs, where Mickey has an amateur talent show. And Donald keeps getting pulled off stage because he can't remember the words to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And then he finally sneaks up back on stage. And I'm like, on Disney Plus, I'm like, where is this? So I popped out the Disney Collection set that it's in. Yeah. And I watched it. I'm like, halfway through, I'm like, I don't know why this would be pulled. And it can't be a rights issue because Disney owns all the rights to their stuff. And especially this stuff. And at the end, Donald pops on stage, pops out a Tommy gun that he's hiding, and starts mowing down the audience. I go, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
And there's another one called Bellboy Donald, which I've done a short on my review page, TJR Tunes. And I talk about how that one was on Disney Plus, and I was wondering, at least it wasn't at the time, but I was wondering why. And then at the end, he spanks this kid like crazy. It's a monster. And I'm like, oh, that's why. So there's a lot of stuff you won't find, but there's also that they have to worry about. And when it came out to the Disney Treasures Collection sets that Leonard Maltin co-produced, Disney was like, we're going to pull the plug when they were like halfway through the Donald sets. They only did volumes 1 and 2, and the staff at home video were like, well, what are you doing? No, you can't. We're collectors too. We love this stuff. You got to continue. So they did put them out, but in greatly reduced numbers. And for Disney, the numbers they put out were just laughable. Like certain copies, I think that Disney Treasures volumes 3 and 4 of Donald, which fetch a high price even now. And each set is only 2 DVDs. But they put out 40,000 copies of each. So the moment they hit the shelves, they were already out of print.
Yeah.
So I mean, and all this goes in, and they don't want to be bothered by it. They don't like it, because with home video, people think like, well, it's what the fans, it's what they demand. That's what gets released. That's not true. What gets released is whatever's the favorite of whoever's in charge. If you like these kinds of movies, that's what gets put out, because that's where their interests are. It's not about the base. It's not about the fans. So which is unfortunate, but they luckily finished off the Disney Treasures Collection, so it was. But when it failed, they go, the executives were like, we knew it was going to fail. Well, you put one commercial out that was on certain DVDs, and That was it. You didn't advertise it hard. You didn't go on a marketing campaign to get these really respected shorts
before
sold.
social media and all that stuff too.
No, this was after social media.
Oh,
Too. This was during the Facebook era. This was they could have done that. They were doing advertisements. They could have pushed a little bit. Now, granted, Disney's advertising and marketing isn't like the most advanced, but I mean they could have. But again, not a lot of innovation there, and they don't put enough faith in their core.
And that's the funny thing that you bring that up, because up until Disney Plus and streaming, those, if you went on eBay, if you went on wherever you buy your DVDs from or old stuff, CDs, whatever, you saw the prices were astronomical. And now if you go on streaming, and sometimes, because Disney really doesn't like putting out the numbers, and especially when they make a failing show, and they put a lot of money into it, they kind of either skew the numbers or that magically gets left off.
Acolyte.
Yeah.
Sorry. What?
Or Ironheart.
I tried to like that so much. It could have been some good parts. There were some good parts, but yeah.
She-Hulk was terrible.
Oh, it was bad.
So here's the thing. Like, for me, it's so funny to see when they actually do put out the numbers, that when you look at what's still ranking on D+, you see the shorts.
Yeah.
And you see the 90s cartoons which were the spin-offs from the shorts.
Yeah.
And then you see the movies that were in that golden age that we'll talk about at some point in this episode or on another show. It's like the proof's in the pudding. Like how you said the executives didn't think, well, you've seen an IP like 20 years ago. Why do you need to like it now?
Right.
It's because it's nostalgia. It's what I grew up with. It's what I poured my cereal to. It's what I remember coming home and being like, I can't wait to watch the next episode. Yeah. It matters to me, damn it. I'm sort of like that meme from the wrestling meme where the guy goes, "It's real to me, damn it." It's like that for so many kids.
Yeah.
Because you grew up on it, I grew up on it.
You want your kids to grow up on it?
Yeah.
And they love it. Your kids loved our stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
We showed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true. Nostalgia is a big seller now. And, if they put it out there, people will buy it. People are suckers for Disney. I am too.
Oh, yeah.
And I just think that, again, they need to have more of it's about longevity, but it's also about seeing 6 months, a year down the line, as opposed to just like, what's this new release going to give us? And that's it.
Yeah.
I just like they're established properties. They're established IP.
It's like, dude, when I went to Disneyland the other day, I know I'm bringing it up again, but I walked by and I saw Chip and Dale, right? And they were there in the full costume and everything. The kids that were, my stepkids that are there, they were like, "Who's that?" And I'm the one running up to him like, "Hey, babe, take a picture." I got Dale,
with your wife, yeah.
Yeah. She's over there taking a picture, and I'm geeking out.
Right.
That's my boy. I grew up with the Rescue Rangers. I grew up with Chip and Dale goofing on Donald.
That's right.
And so yeah, I mean that's the cool part of Disneyland, because. And why KCAL kids work so good, because not only were we seeing it then when we were young and kids, but when we get older, we remember. I mean, because who else? I mean, again, nobody knows outside of California because it was regional. I doubt it went anywhere else, but still, I mean, there's a lot of people that go there and be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that's where the kids did this or that." I remember, it just brings you back.
Yeah,
and that's why Disneyland is so magical of a place, because. I'm in my 40s and I'm just still like geeking out over all the cool cartoons in the past.
Yeah, and it came about, you talked about this earlier, because their first animated renaissance was like in the 30s, 40s, and it was like at its peak. But then when you get into Disney, what I call Disney's second animated renaissance was in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And that's where KCAL Kids kind of fell in the middle of it, because you had DuckTales, which kicked it all off, for Disney at least, because they went back to full animation. Because for a lot of years, after theatrical animation ended, you had TV animation, but they had to be cheap and fast. So you did that with limited animation, which Hanna-Barbera revolutionized. So you had,
talk about cheap.
Well, it didn't start out, but it didn't start out that way.
Yeah,
That's the thing. It was a cheap and faster way to do it, but you had the Flintstones, which was very successful, and was the only Hanna-Barbera project that actually went on for more than one season. If you look back, all the other shows, for the most part, 90% of their output, one season.
Yeah.
The Flintstones was the longest running animated series until The Simpsons. But it was really good. But after time, especially in the 70s, it did get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and it got very obvious. But then you had companies, and there was like a mid-level time period of the early 80s to the mid 80s, where you had stuff like Real Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all of these shows that were getting more into fuller animation again because they wanted to capitalize, of course, on toy making.
Animaniacs, Tiny Toons.
In the 90s, yeah. But in the 80s, you had like all these shows that were kind of like the bridging the gap.
The bridging the gap, yeah.
And then you had DuckTales, and that kind of changed everything because then you got back into full, richer, more expensive animation, of course, which is actually Disney's fault.
So Transformers too in that era, right? The 80s.
Transformers,
Inspector Gadget.
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, yeah.
You had a lot of that. That Saturday morning block, that's when that really started to kick in. You had some amazing nostalgic shows.
Absolutely.
But the quality was being put back in it. You know what I mean? Of course, now what I mean by it was Disney's fault is because of the Disney strikes, and we'll get into that in another episode, but what happened was eventually everybody started getting paid what they should have. It was less slave labor, more reasonable hours to animate here in the States. So, of course, everything got more expensive, and by the time TV was kicking in and eating up theatrical funds and theatrical money, you had the end of that and the rise of TV animation. But that was because of Disney and the strike, you know, and then people got paid what they were worth. And then, of course, you had, we were just talking about it. Limited animation became very popular. But then things just kept getting more and more expensive. And then when it came to the late 80s, early 90s, you had a lot of other countries getting the animation shipped to them. They would animate and it would be sent back. So Korea, Vietnam, wherever it was cheaper, that's when companies would send their stuff out to get animated. That's why a lot of cartoons in the 80s had like an anime feel because they were being animated in Asian countries by Asian artists.
Yeah.
So, you know, Asian animators, which is great because it gave you that manga feel, and it kind of brought, I think, a lot of people into like the manga and anime scene as well, which is another story. But you know, when Disney started doing it, they got back into that rich, expensive, full animation to where the characters, you know, moved fully. It wasn't as limited, and you know, it's just more appealing. And then you got Rescue Rangers, and then you did Tailspin, which they were banking off again their established IP, just repackaging them. DuckTales was Donald Duck, was Huey, Dewey, and Louie. All that.
I remember one of the first episodes of DuckTales. It was one of my favorite cartoons. But the first episode, like Donald's going back on into the Navy.
The Navy, yeah.
And so he's like, "Hey, I need my brother to watch my kids."
Uncle.
Yeah, well, yeah, uncle watch the kids.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, he goes right into that, and then they have to stay with him, and it's sort of like, oh, we're going to a rich uncle, you know,
right.
You know, dad's a struggling sailor or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're living in a house, you know, money beyond their means.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. It was a good story, you know, and then they were able to launch out of that launch pad.
Darkwing Duck was a spin-off of DuckTales.
Yes.
That's right.
And they kept spinning off, but see, they would use a like you said, an established IP, like Baloo would
characters,
would turn into Tailspin.
Jungle Book, yeah.
Yeah, Chip and Dale would be the Rescue Rangers.
Right.
And yeah, it's pretty cool, man.
It was the core block of our after-school life.
It was.
It was really impressive, and they did a great job in it. Even more modern interpretations when they did the redo of DuckTales. I was surprised at how good that was.
Yeah, you know, I went into that one with zero expectations.
I'm like, this is going to be garbage. Let's see what they do. They're going to modernize it and make it weird. It was awesome. And the way they actually got to end it, because cartoons never had series finales. That wasn't something you did. They were a way to sell toys. But the way DuckTales did it, and we're not going to ruin it for anybody, but you got to watch it. If you grew up watching DuckTales, the Disney Channel one. It's on Disney Plus now, but you watch that. It was surprisingly good. They did change a few things, but they made it really interesting and modernized it in a way that at the end really brought a lot of respect, or showed a lot of respect for the original fans, because they also kind of explain about the boys' moms, like the triplets' mother, because Donald is their uncle. He's their uncle as well. And I guess Scrooge is their great uncle, but they never explain, like a lot of times in the comics too. It's kind of, you're kind of confused as to who's their parentage. You know, where are these kids, you know, coming from that they're being shipped off.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because even in the, I got into comics early 90s, and I actually, although I was into the hardcore like Ninja Turtles when they first started, the Eastman and Laird and the violent ones and all that stuff, and I got into X-Men and all that other, Superman, Batman. I still was the goofy kid that picked up, Darkwing Duck, the Adventures of Donald Duck, or the Adventures of what is it called?
Talespin.
DuckTales.
DuckTales.
Yeah, so I would get those when those came out, when the cartoon shows came out, and
Right.
I remember back then they didn't do an origin on how it was. So like, yeah, it was just like straight into the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's some of the original DuckTales from the 80s and 90s did explain some of Scrooge's origins, but again, yeah, it wasn't really about that. They weren't really about that kind of storytelling, in a kid show. But it started some interesting conversations in terms of animation back then. But that also gave birth to a lot of, the popularity of a lot of the after school block, let's just say.
Yeah.
You had, again, Ninja Turtles was going for a long time. Garfield and Friends was an amazing show that I loved.
Every Saturday.
Every Saturday, yeah. The Saturday morning just became like a sacred cow for kids. You know what I mean? That was where you wanted to be, is in front of a TV. And man, had some of the best toys too, because that was originally their purpose.
Yeah, the cartoon, if it were to last on CBS, ABC or Fox or whatever affiliation, because over here we had KCOP too.
Right.
It had to sell toys.
Yep.
I mean, you literally had to sell toys. And some cartoons actually made it, like we were talking the other day. I brought up Exo Squad.
Yep.
That one, the toys sold really good in stores because of how well built they were made by Playmates.
Yep.
And people got into the show after. Usually it was, you'd watch the show and you'd be like, hey, I want the toys.
Yeah.
And you'd search them out at Toys R Us or KB or whatever you went.
R.I.P.
But yeah, but Exo Squad, it was like I personally saw them before I saw the show.
Yeah.
And the show came on at 6 a.m. So
Jeez, yeah.
So I would go. I went to Toys R Us one time, looking for Ninja Turtles, the latest versions, because you got to make a version out of everything.
Right.
I was probably looking for Pizza Dawn or something, and I went in there and I was like, what the hell are these mechs and like the war stuff? So I was all into that. I was like, man, this is pretty cool. And I saw the toys. I'm like, I want to watch the cartoon. So it worked both ways.
Yeah. Well, it was in the 80s specifically. It was It was much more of a business model, to where the FCC actually had to step in. I believe it was the FCC that had to stop them, because toy companies would go like, okay, we're putting out this new figure next month, write an episode on them.
Yeah.
All about that. And the FCC is like, you can't really do that, because that's manipulative, and it's really just manipulating that market. And so they had to step in and stop them. So in the 90s, it got a little more story oriented, because if you watch a lot of the stuff in the 80s, it wasn't as much like, a lot of deep story. It was more about selling them toys. If they could write a good story, like that was a bonus. But in the 90s, with the upcoming Batman the Animated Series, which you and I always bonded over.
That's got to be a multiple episode one.
Oh, that's going to be a bunch. That's going to be arcs, because man, that show's got so much. But when it came to stuff like that, you really got down to really mature storytelling in animation, and it was impressive. But I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that the FCC had to stop them from making just basically half-hour toy commercials every day.
And that makes sense, because I think me and you talked about this off air with like Transformers. Like Transformers had a basic set of characters.
Yeah.
And then at some point when the toys were selling too much, it's like, well, they didn't get the idea of a pizza slinging Optimus Prime, so you got to do something else. All of a sudden you'd see new cars.
Yeah.
So although their story was established, how they came down to, we know the Transformers stories, all of a sudden, hey, they found these T-Rex, a set of T-Rex,
right.
Or dinosaur Autobots, or hey, these construction Decepticons, and you could build them into one big old toy.
Yep.
So
I know. Well, the funny thing is, a friend of mine who we're doing a gaming podcast as well. We're on a gaming show podcast. He knows like crazy copious amounts of like Transformers are like his thing, right? Like, and it's really impressive. But he shows me, he's got a huge collection of them, and he keeps talking about like a lot of the films specifically, and how they do a lot of releases of characters that weren't in the movies, in the movie lines, because they may have been in a script or in a novelization. So whatever they can take, they do. And sometimes certain companies will work with them to do with Transformers. Car companies will work with them and license through them, and then so you could have like Lamborghinis and Ferraris. Some cars don't, but they look like the model. It's like, it goes pretty deep. Even now they still do that. Even now they release like lost characters and then stuff like that, because those sell. They make money. Transformers have always made money.
Oh yeah, that's universal. It's around the world. You can go to Japan; those are huge. So it's sort of like the manga for over there.
Yeah, because the mechs and mech suits and all that—that's huge in manga and anime.
Yeah, they love the Robotech type feel.
Yeah, exactly.
But dude, getting back to KCAL kids though, because I know I think this is an episode for us that's like showing the fact that we can go to different variations of different cartoons, different genres.
Because I think it connects everything for us.
It does.
It's KCAL kind of like was the beginning
start
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it brought the old, like again, when we talked about off air, that episode, the trailer, the long Mickey's long trailer.
Oh, Mickey's trailer. That was such a great commentary because we were talking about that. And it's funny, talking about this stuff kind of opens you up to realizing, even the animators may not have thought about it, but it was like an ecosystem kind of thing. They were talking with Mickey's trailer. It's one of the greatest shorts. It's one of my favorites too. And how at the very beginning, you describe it. How does it begins very idyllic?
Yeah, you're looking at the trailer that looks like a house. It's got a picket fence. It's got sunshine and clouds in the background. And
ideal trailer living.
Yeah, and I forget who starts, who says they need to go or something like that. Or I think it might be Goofy. He has the car and he backs up to the trailer, and then he presses a button. The background changes, like you said, into industrial, like an
industrial wasteland.
Yeah,
and it's like a commentary on industrialization and how it ruins things and how people are living at the time. Because this was probably late 30s.
It's got to be late 30s. Yeah, it's during the Depression and all that stuff.
Yeah, around that time,
or maybe after, one of the two.
Yeah, I think it could have been. I think you're right. It was probably during or probably at the end. But when the false background, because the background they have of this beautiful blue sky and all this stuff, it shows like pollution in the background. It shows like how terrible the surrounding area is. I'm like, now that we were talking about it off air, like you said, it was kind of like about, in a way, subconsciously about conservation, I think, in a way, or at least a commentary on how people were really living, surviving. And it was kind of quite fascinating, but it was also the age of invention. So they were like that, everything was push button.
Yeah,
that was a big thing. Everything would change. The bedroom would turn into a bathroom when Donald was having his bath and that whole thing.
Yeah, because Goofy's like, it's breakfast time. And then like Donald's like, and then Mickey's like, all right, got to press that button.
Yep.
But it's funny because in Goofy's car always had like a patch on the tire.
Right, yeah.
And he had the radiator that was spitting water, so it was barely holding on, and he's just like, driving like, I'll get you there in a little bit.
That's pretty good. Yeah, and it was funny, yeah, because throughout the whole short, he loses track of them, and then the wild thing is the doggone thing starts rolling down a mountainside and going through all these these crazy scenarios.
And funny enough, that cartoon was the inspiration for the new Mickey ride in Toontown today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the one where the train, nothing can stop us now.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you go on the ride and then the pie from Pluto goes into the smokestack of the train. The train loses the cars and then you go on a wild ride,
Oh, funny.
And then you come back and Goofy, he says, and that's what the story behind me having pants and Pluto not having pants. You're like, wait a minute. And then and then you go about your way, but that's the same thing that happens because then the what is it called? The trailer goes down the hill, and they get into this huge thing where everything they get bounced around. I mean, it's such a great story.
And then at the end, the trailer gets locked back into the back of the car, and Goofy doesn't think anything happened.
Yeah, he's like, got you through that rough patch.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's just a great, ingenious short. But that was a lot of what they were doing during the war and around that era. They were really innovating, like I keep saying, but they were really just like hitting their stride.
The drawing was great because I remember in a specific part, they're rolling down the hill. Mickey has to hold on to the gate to the sliding rail so it doesn't fall off the side of the hill.
Right.
As they come down, Donald's like, whew. All of a sudden you hear the horn of a train, and the train's coming, and then you see Donald on his knees, praying, and Mickey's like sweating, and then they barely make it through, and then he's like, "Wow, that was good," and then all of a sudden another train's coming from the other side, and they're about to hit that.
Again, it's the tension, the stakes were high, but for a cartoon, it was just so funny, complex, and fast. Like there was always something happening, but the animation, of course, was tight. And it was an animation that not a lot of companies could match. And with Disney, what he would do, and they were constantly learning. That was the thing that made them so great. Disney at the studio in Burbank, and maybe even before their Hyperion studio, they would have classes they would take to get better. Because when they started, they were doing what they were doing, but
very raw.
Walt knew that they could be better. So for even even for later on with the films, when it came to live animals, when it came to all that stuff, they would have live animals, lions being brought into the studio so they could have live drawings, like life drawings, real life drawings. And they would practice constantly. They would get better. And they did that for years. He would have classes. Even after they were successful, to where the artists can keep going and keep making it better.
Training the next generation and so on and so on.
And making the older guys better, like practice constantly. So that's why, and it showed in their output, because the output was always very rich and it was always getting better and better.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because when we went in to see that display about Walt Disney, the artist rendering, some of the people that he had doing those early cartoons had done some of the base models for his concept of his theme park.
Right.
So the drawings you got that old school Disney feel to them, but that's because those are some of his original guys working on the projects with him. Man, those drawings are beautiful. Yeah. You know, the artist renderings of how he wanted the Jungle Cruise,
right,
or Tomorrowland. It was gorgeous.
Yeah, a lot of what he did was great, and he was great at just kind of like letting it, because he was an animator early on, but he understood that he was, he understood how to relinquish to more talented men and more talented people. And he was good at that. He was good at just kind of letting go a little bit, because he was also the voice of Mickey for until the 50s. I think the last time he voiced Mickey was actually during the introduction to the Mickey Mouse TV show. And that was kind of it, because his voice started to change because he smoked so much. Yeah. Eventually it led to his cancer. But, him smoking like that is what's changed his voice. And then, there have been a few actors to play Mickey. But he was pretty good at that. And he was good at keeping that talent growing. And he was good. It was a good story man. And he was good, and he wasn't the easiest to work with all the time, but he had some, like, for all the issues I have with Walt, which are many, but I also love a lot of what he did, because a lot of what he did was the right thing, and he created something that we all cherish and grew up with to this day, and kids are still growing up with Disney.
Now let me ask you this, because those were the Eisner years. Do you think, in your opinion, or do you know, because I know you're pretty tied in with Disney, you have a lot of friends in the Disney company, but I've always wanted to know this. With that second renaissance that you talk about, with Disney doing the whole reanimation, or just putting more detail and having the better animators, it's a long-winded question, bear with me.
No, it's all right. It's okay.
I just have to set it up right, and then you throw it down. Basically, with all that being said, and do you think that at some point Eisner or his crew, or the animators or the family, were like, hey, we need to get back to how Disney was in that time period, per se? Like, great storytelling, great drawing, family friendly, like do you think that was the
plan?
Yeah.
I think they got lucky.
Really?
I think they got lucky with who they chose. Howard Ashman was an amazing storyteller, and before he died, he passed away in the early 90s of AIDS. Unfortunately, the complications due to that. He wrote, again, some of their greatest theatrical work. But for their TV crew, for the TV stuff, I think it was more of a conscious, concerted effort, seeing that the different companies were doing, like I said, Ghostbusters. They were making so much money off Ninja Turtles. All that was just coming in. It was like money, 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 money. And a lot of studios were using more classic characters. Even Garfield, which wasn't that old. Garfield was created in the late 70s. He'd been around 10 years before he had a show. But I think they just wanted to jump on the bandwagon, and they're like, well, we can do it our way. Let's do it our way. Let's get into it. I think you're right. I think there was a classic aspect to their styling. They're like, if we're going to make this work, it's got to be a little better. It's got to be hip, but it's got to retain some of the Disney short magic, some of the stuff we had in the past. They knew they were going to have to put some money into it, because they had lost a lot of money throughout the 70s and 80s because of lackluster projects, or projects that just didn't land properly. And the 90s wasn't all perfect. They still lost a bit of money in the 90s, but they made way more hits than they did failures. But I think because they needed a win, because in 1987, there wasn't a huge Disney film. Again, Don Bluth was beating them. Don Bluth, his output was better at the point, let's just say it. But I think with TV, they're like, okay, we can tap into this Saturday morning thing. We can do something like that. Let's see what we can do. And I think they're like, well, let's take these characters, throw them in, and an executive just liked the idea, and they're like, all right, let's go with it. And I think there were enough correct moves to where adding in the Disney style of old because they knew why Don Bluth left. And they're like, well, maybe some of them by that time were like, yeah, well, maybe we do need to recapture some of the old stuff because the new stuff hasn't been working for a long time. And I think that's where that came from. So I think for the TV, it was more of a concerted effort. I think with film, they may have thought the same thing, but I think they just got really lucky with the talent they hired. The animators, like going back to like Andres Deja, who was a great artist for Disney, putting him into it and having that magical combination of art, writing, and musical direction, I think really was what got them going. In the films, I think with TV it was more correct executive decisions, but with there was a little more creativity put into it. But I think overall, I don't want to say this. Overall, they kind of got a little lucky. They did, and they banked on nostalgia, because let's face it, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Uncle Scrooge, Donald Duck, they're all staples. That's why they didn't create new characters in DuckTales. They used old characters. And the same thing with Tailspin. They used old characters. And once DuckTales was a success, then they spun off Darkwing Duck, because they were also banking on the Batman movies that had just come out in the late 80s through Tim Burton, who, ironically enough, like I said before, was an animator for them.
Yeah.
So I think they were borrowing from a lot of things that worked in the past and just put it together in a nice new little bright package, and then it worked. And I think they got lucky. But again, having such a rich store of classic IP helped them bring the old people on, the old fans and their children now, and gave them a new life. Because Disney, even in home video, they were behind the times in the 80s.
Yeah.
They were very anti-VHS. They're like, why would we put our movies out on VHS? Because they made a lot of their money re-releasing their theatrical films over and over again. Every few years, every 5 years, they'd release Fantasia in theaters, make a ton of money off that. Pinocchio.
They'd vault it, so to speak.
They would vault it in the theaters before they did that on home video, creating, what does that create? False scarcity. So they were kings of that for generations.
Definitely, dude.
So that's why you better get it now because it's going to go away.
First 20 years, they'd be like, we're only selling this for another 6 months, and then you wouldn't see it or hear about it for about 4 or 5 years, and then, hey, we're re-releasing this. It's like, what?
One new special feature. Enjoy it. Just sing along. You're like, oh, come on, dude. But no, they've done that. But they fought tooth and nail to try and stop VHS from happening. So they're like, we're going to lose so much money. And then finally, when they jumped on the bandwagon with Pinocchio, that was the first one, I believe, that they really put out there from their classic library. Huge hit. But it was even in the 90s, even their films in the 80s, it wasn't like it is now where films automatically get a home video release, especially with Disney. As a kid, I always wondered about Oliver and Company. That didn't get released until 1997, 10 years, more or less, after it came out. So they were still behind the 8 ball in a lot of stuff. But when they finally catch up, they do it well. And, Disney's they were the king of home video when home video was king. But, with TV, the TV shows we grew up with, I think, again, nostalgia, going back to the origins, putting a little more money into it, and it worked. And once it worked once, then they kept repeating the style. Chippendale's Rescue Rangers, couple new characters, but it's Chippendale. And they were banking off the characters of the time as well, because they're dressed up like Indiana Jones, and the other one's dressed up like Magnum P.I.
Exactly. That's what I always got. I love that, man. You did have the two characters combined right there, and then they had the cross. They had the same personalities. Yep. But they weren't like the Magnum P.I. Chip rip off, but they did use that. Yeah.
Yeah, as an homage, but it's also, and then you got creative animators. And that's the other thing too, like with Batman the Animated Series. You had people that grew up with Spielberg as well when he was doing Animaniacs and his Warner Brothers stuff, Tiny Toons. He grew up with that stuff back in the 50s and the 60s as a kid. So, a lot of these guys that grew up with this as kids ended up creating the animation, those cartoons themselves. So they put into it what they loved. So that was the
passion project.
Yeah, they were passionate because they loved the originals as kids and they wanted to do something like that, bring that into their work. And I think that was a huge part of it.
And going full circle on this one, if you think about all the cartoons that we mentioned, in late 80s transferring into the early 90s before 1995, 94, that's probably when they started to slow down off the mid-afternoon cartoons a little bit. Yeah. Or change up the format anyway, because there was a few good years there.
The Warner Brothers ruled for a while.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Disney had to compete, telling wholesome stories, not so edgy stories, relatable stories, nostalgia figure of feelings, with Saturday morning cartoons that had Garfield more sarcastic, Ninja Turtles, upbeat and like aggressive in a way. Batman. You had Spider-Man. You had X-Men, Superman. So you had all the comic book characters out there. Then you had to deal with the reboots of Transformers, getting into Beast Wars, which was like legendary at the time because you're like, oh my God, I've never seen this before.
Yep.
And then you had the Saturday morning cartoons you had to deal with.
Reboot. Remember the show Reboot?
Yeah, Reboot. There was just a lot of competition. Like you brought up Animaniacs and Tiny Toons.
Yeah.
That was slapped Steven Spielberg.
Right.
So he was the hottest thing going on at the time. So it's like anything he touched turned to gold. They were sarcastic. I remember getting into them. I was like, man, these cartoons are hilarious because they poked fun at Hollywood and everything else like that.
Well, there's also a lot of adult humor that they can't release anymore.
You could watch it today and be like, man, they can't show. Yeah,
they can't do that.
It was Family Guy before Family Guy.
Yeah, in a weird way it was. And the thing about Spielberg that I always love to mention was that when they offered him Tiny Toons, because he loved cartoons, he always said that. He goes, fine. He goes, I have one condition. He goes, I want live orchestrated music like it was in the 40s and 50s with the Looney Tunes back then. And Warner Brothers is like, no, that's expensive. We're not going to do that. Because that's a band, that's orchestra, that's time, that's money, that's a studio space. And they're like, no, thank you. He's like, then I'm not doing it. They're like, fine. So they capitulated. And he, of course, created that live orchestration again, which made it so much richer. The soundtracks, which is, again, is another episode. But in every show after that, and that when Batman, the animated series came around, they definitely did live orchestrations for that. Shirley Walker was amazing, rest in peace, but she was an amazing composer. Did a lot of the episodes for that show. It was very welcoming of new talent when it comes to the composers on the show that they would use. It was beautiful, but it was because of Spielberg that we had all that for years. And they did that for about a good 10 years before they started going to synth again with like Justice League.
Yeah, where they kind of cheapened it a bit, but I will agree. It seemed like with that when we get into the animated series at some point, it's like if you could tell somebody, okay, make something perfect. I think that was it, man.
I know. And they had beloved imperfections, things that were not perfect about the show, but it didn't matter because the show was that good.
Yeah,
it was that good. You didn't care.
No, you didn't care. I mean, it was just amazing. To this day, I still get goosebumps watching episodes.
Right. And it's funny because, like you were saying, I didn't realize that, but yeah, Disney really had to start to compete, even though they kind of gave birth to the after school block. They did start to have to compete with other studios. And look, I love DuckTales. I love all those shows. I loved them as a kid, but as you're getting into like your older years, you're still a preteen, but you're getting to like 10, 11, 12. When it comes to like the action shows and you're really getting into Batman, Superman, X-Men, all these shows, that have so much more to offer in terms of action. That's hard to compete, even for Disney.
Well, yeah, look at what happened, because the evolution of it was KCAL Kids first, and then introduced the blocks of those cartoons, the 2-hour block in the afternoon, and you had like you reminisce on the old stuff and then get the new characters as spinoffs. As DuckTales came to an end, and as other cartoons like Talespin came to an end, they had to upgrade it with, I think it was Gummy Bears, or what was it? What was those bears one?
Oh, that was, Gummy Bears were around the late 80s, early 90s too. I think it was early 90s, but maybe. No,
I think it was after, because it became part of the block later with Gargoyles. And there was a couple other shows that tried to replace those, and they just didn't hit as good. Gargoyles was one that I liked a lot.
That was the one I think they were trying to compete with, because Gargoyles was dark.
It was very dark.
It was dark. I keep forgetting it's a Disney show. That's right.
Yeah.
No, but it was a great show. But see, that was a great thing, but they couldn't. They're Disney. That's always their excuse. We're Disney. We can't do too much of A, B, and C.
And see, KCAL, I know they owned KCAL being local here, because obviously, Disney took that channel over and they were able to do whatever they wanted to. At the time, they owned the Angels at the time, the baseball team. They were Disney, so they put them on there too. So it was kind of like their Disney channel, on local television here.
Right.
But I still go back to KCAL Kids as being the birth of everything. And when they had to get rid of those guys, I know they started Toontown Kids after.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah, they started Toontown Kids after, when they opened Toontown with a whole set of other kids.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And they
repressed memories, folks. It's all coming up now.
I know, right?
Repressed nostalgia.
It's my fault. But no, Yeah, I remember they did Toontown Kids, and they tried to keep that block going.
Yeah.
Because they opened up another park, and it was trying to replicate the same kind of thing where it's like, hey, check out Disneyland. Have your parents come down here. Look at what we're doing here. And then they would go back to the older cartoons again, show Jiminy Cricket, or that was the thing, too. I want to jump in real quick. The shorts on the life lesson episodes, like the ant and the grasshopper.
Yeah, which was Goofy's voice, Dawes Butler.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Pinto Colvig. Excuse me.
He's playing the, what's it called?
Violin or the fiddle.
The fiddle. Yeah. He's playing the fiddle, and he's saying,
oh, the world owes me a living. There you
go. That's perfect.
I think that was an Aesop's fable, too, that they turned into that, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But no, and that was a good one. Another one like that was the Wise Old Hen with Donald Duck's first color appearance. Mm-hmm. His first appearance anywhere, I think.
Yeah.
They had some good lessons. That's right. And I always loved the Wise Old Hen, or the Little Wise Hen. I can't remember, but it was the one where he was just kind of a side character with a pig, and he wanted to be a lazy layabout, and that was kind of the same thing with the grasshopper and the ants.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of those. Those were really good. I forgot. That's right.
Yeah, they had a lot of those episodes, or they would go back into how to play sports, because I know you were talking about the goofy ones.
Yeah, and those were fun. But the interesting thing is, if you notice, Goofy doesn't say anything in those, because Pinto Colvig, the actor who was the voice of Goofy, went to Walt and asked for more money. And Walt said, nope, you're fired. And then they started doing the narrator and having Goofy. They would use stock footages of his screams and his laughs. But no, he didn't. Yeah, he was gone for a while, and he started working for Warner Brothers.
And you mentioned the funny thing you bring up, because one of those videos in that time period when he was fired, you mentioned when you went to go get your driver's license, the driving.
Oh no! Okay, so it wasn't my driver's license. Okay, it wasn't my driver's license.
Was it a permit?
It was no. I got a speeding ticket.
Oh, speeding ticket. Okay, there you go. My bad.
Sorry about that, guys. It was the only one I've gotten. But when you go to driver's training, as a way to circumvent a point on your license, they show you Motor Mania.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen Motor Mania, it's a Goofy short that he's technically only in visually, again, not his voice.
The drawing is fantastic in that, by the way.
It's great, but it's also the nuclear age of American, middle class. It was very interesting the way it's drawn. It represents the time, but it also represented how horrible people are behind the wheel, and it's just as relevant today as it was 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And they made us watch that. I'm like, hey, I know where this is from. Of course, it's not a happy place, so I'm not going hey guys, let's talk about the short. But it's amazing that to this day they show that in driver's training classes.
They do. Oh, one other episode I want to draw. Let's see if you can remember this one. It was about a car. When it was brought out, the family had it or whatever, and then it got beat up, and it was in the junkyard. It was about ready to get wrecked, and then this kid wound up buying it. It got a second life. He turned it into a little convertible.
There was one like that about a little house. Do you remember the little house one?
Yeah, the little house one, yeah.
There's some really touching, and those were in the 50s. Those were in the 50s. Those were a little different, but they're like one-shots. I guess we'd call them one-shots now. And some of those were actually really, really heartwarming.
Mostly with an orchestra, but a visual presentation storyline.
Yeah.
No words said.
No, and there's something very touching about those.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's right. Though, because it wasn't about comedy. It really wasn't. There were some funny bits, but it was mostly they were dramatic animated shorts. It's funny. And the only short to win an Oscar that I'm aware of, or at least the first Oscar that they won, was called The Old Mill. And that was because they started using the multi-plane camera, which I actually got to see and touch, even though it's signed at Disney, because I was working at Disney that day, said, do not touch. I'm like, I'm going to touch it anyway. So
told me to touch.
I'm a rebel. Because I'm like, when am I going to get a chance to see the actual multi-plane camera rig? But they would have animation on multiple levels, so when you would zoom in or pan over or push in, it would go through multiple layers and would give it that depth. And the Old Mill had that, and they used it on there, and it won the Oscar for Best Short. Like you said, a lot of the stuff that was done without dialogue and just music was so moving. Even the kind of cuter ones that they did, like Little Hiawatha, that was always one of my favorites.
Yes.
Remember?
Yes. Man. Yeah, that brings me down memory lane, because, and to go back to the original point being KCAL Kids, they would tie in some sort of story that would get you into a heartwarming episode or a funny, goofy episode.
Yeah, they would match them, yeah.
Yeah, or like Donald just being ridiculous. I mean, because some of those cartoons can make you laugh so hard.
Yeah.
Even to this day with the shenanigans they would get themselves into. Or bring a tear to your eye and be like, man, that was really heartwarming, that cartoon.
In 7 minutes.
Yeah, and you're generally just so happy to see the ending come out the way it did.
Yeah.
And because when all else fails and it looks like it's going to be disaster for the hero or the storyline, you're like, wow, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And like you said, 7 minutes. I mean, some people, like, again, can't tell a full story in 2 hours.
Right.
I was just talking to a friend the other day about, like, the Zelda things. Hey, are you pumped up about the Zelda movie? I'm like, no. I'd rather it be a series, because you could take one video game and make it into an 8 to 10 episode thing.
We talked about that, too, on the gaming podcast. Yep.
Yeah, and so, like, when you have something like this, too, where, again, you just have the brilliance of a great mind back then along with a great team. Mm-hmm. It just makes it all come together. So
because back then they were artists, they weren't writers.
Yeah,
they would come up with pitches and ideas for Walt, and they would storyboard them and put them up on a wall, and then Walt would go through them and see if it worked, and he'd throw out things he didn't like. But you had a group of artists really making these, and it shows because of the love and Warner Brothers was different. I love Warner Brothers. Don't get me wrong, but
me too.
They were a different breed. They did slapstick comedy. They were Warner's. Warner's was different. Disney, and you could love both. It doesn't have to be Marvel or DC. It can be both. You can love both of them for different reasons. But Disney did its own Disney thing so succinctly and so well because they wanted to tell every kind of story, but they wanted to really reach you. And I think throughout their shorts they did. And even as kids, when we watched all that, it touched us as well. And it hits you different as an adult, but as a kid, you like it because it's quality and it's not speaking down to you. Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of companies fail. They speak down to their audience like, well, let's make it for kids because we're talking to kids. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. The reason they've succeeded is because none of these shorts were made for kids.
Yeah.
These had maybe kids in mind, but they weren't for kids. These were for people that were paying to go see a movie, because back in the day, you'd go see 2 movies, a theatrical short, a newsreel, and maybe something else for like 25 cents, 10 cents, but you'd be at the theater for 5 hours, but you'd be an adult, there'd be kids there too, but you'd have, these were made for movie-going adults that paid for a ticket.
And these Disney things, especially during the war years, were palate cleansers.
Yeah.
Because of all the frustration that Americans probably felt in the day after being bombed by Pearl Harbor, or the frightening fear of a war starting prior. So, like, when you would go, like you said, to see one of these movies, you would have the newsreel probably before it, and then you'd have a Disney short to kind of like, okay, take the bad taste out of your mouth, and then we'll get to the feature film,
right?
So
exactly. It was an experience. It was a whole day experience.
Yeah, and then it changed to now let's go see a Disney short by itself.
Right, yeah.
We have another one premiering.
Yeah, Pixar does that.
Yeah, yeah. So Disney was, my God, so far ahead of its time. It seems like in every generation from when he started onward. I mean, he was a catalyst for a lot of things, and a lot of people have emulated his style or emulated the studio style over the years. Yeah. But you definitely know when a Disney project is a Disney project.
Yeah. And you did, especially in the 90s. Like they had, remember Disney Adventure Magazine?
Yeah.
It was that little itty bitty thing at the grocery store. It was probably like, 6 inches by 4 inches, like little, and you'd flip through it and they'd have comic versions of episodes of the show or their own little adventures. But yeah, they made some really good choices back then.
They did.
And not to say they don't now, but it's just different. There's so much more money in it now. Like they were on such tight budgets back then, even though it was Disney, it's like they weren't spending all this money. Now for a show like, what is it, like the one that was really good, Andor. Like the show Andor, it's like hundreds of millions for a season of like 8 episodes.
Well, and that's super expensive. But I will, and they mass produced those back in the day. But let me just tell you this too. I forgot to bring up a point where how like McDonald's and Burger King always were competing with toys, right?
Yep.
And it seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember before even the Ninja Turtles and other groups capitalized on the fast food toy brand, it seemed like Disney afternoon cartoons. I remember seeing a lot of DuckTales. I remember seeing a lot of Talespin toys in the McDonald's Happy Meals. So what that did for me was like, oh, I want to buy the toys that are in the store. Yeah. Because those were like, okay, they're kind of like pick and choose episode toys, figurines, but they're not the actual figurine by themselves. You know what I mean? Like it would have like Baloo in a little plane, a little plastic plane.
Yeah.
But to get the actual action figures itself, I wanted to get, go to the store and buy them.
Yeah. I think that would happen too, like Batman Returns. It was kind of the same deal because I remember McDonald's had that, the Back to the Future stuff. I still have the little Back to the Future DeLorean. I was fortunate enough to get that. A friend of mine, Richard, when I was a kid, I think one of his family members worked at a McDonald's, and he brought home a box of the toys, of the DeLoreans. There was probably like 50 of them in there.
You're all, can I get one?
I know. He gave me a couple, and only one survived.
Oh, okay.
But I have that somewhere. I keep that close. I love that thing. But no, yeah, I think you're right, because I remember the Batman Returns stuff. That was the first superhero movie my mom took me to go see, and yeah, McDonald's did have the toys, but it made you want the other ones too. You know what I mean? That's the power of the marketing,
Yeah, because it's like, okay, you can get a cheap little toy version of your favorite cartoon or whatever for like, well, at the time the Happy Meals were like $2.99 or something like that.
Yeah, something unheard of now.
Yeah,
you have to take out a car loan.
Now there's 6 times the amount. but no, I mean, you go and you get a Happy Meal, and I was like, cool, man. I got Baloo, because I remember one time. And speaking of gummy bears, I was never a fan of that show.
Right.
And I remember going to McDonald's, and I don't know why it sticks out in my mind, but my mom, I was like, "Can you give me a Happy Meal?" And I was begging her for one, and
as we all did.
Yeah, and she gets me a Happy Meal, and I look, and it's the gummy bear chief or whatever. I forget what he had.
The hell is this?
Yeah, and he was like in some kind of little car, and I'm like, dude, come on, really, dude? I don't want this guy. And I went up to the cashier like twice. Can I get a different one? She's like, that's the only one we have today. I'm like, and then I went back to my seat, and I got back up, and I'm like, no, let me ask somebody else. And I asked somebody else, and they're like, that's all we have, sweetie. I'm like, damn it.
as a young child, I said, damn it, and threw the toy away. I threw it in their face. No, I know. That was always the disappointing part too. Back to the Future. You'd get everything except for the DeLorean. The only way I got it was because of my friend Richard. He's the one that, gave me one because he had a bunch of them. He would destroy those things too. It was so terrible. Now, like, God, they'd be worth so much money. But
a lot of those McDonald's toys were,
man,
because a lot of them.
Nostalgia, I'm telling you. But Disney did it really well.
They did.
They did a lot of that. And like I said, Disney's not perfect. We're not saying Disney is perfect, but just from the standpoint of it being kind of a catalyst for us really diving in and really understanding these cartoons and loving them. I think KCAL Kids, for us, it's why the name of the show is TNT, Tye and Todd, KCAL Kids, because we were KCAL Kids. We were Southern California. It was for us. So, we grew up loving it because of that, and we grew up loving it even more because the shows were good quality. But I think we grew up loving it more because we ended up having a respect for the older stuff as well.
Yeah.
So that made us, it's kind of cyclical, like, which one did you love first? Which one did you love more? It's like, well, one kind of fed into the other, which was a great thing and brilliant on Disney's part. And I wish more of the shorts were available on Disney Plus. I wish a lot of their catalog was. It's not there. But, they have a lot of stuff, a lot of great stuff, but not all of it. That's why the Disney Treasures collection was so great. Like Warner Archive is doing that with a lot of their Warner Brothers cartoons now. And they have throughout the years, but they slowed down for a while, but now it's starting to ramp up a little bit, which is great. But they're showing a lot more respect to the classic stuff. And as you get older, you kind of want to know the origins of where what you love came from. And to see that it came from such a rich environment, makes you just kind of respect it all the more so. And I'm the guy that, as a kid, I'd take things apart, put them back together. When I was 2 years old, I used to take apart this little chair my mom had, with a little screwdriver. That was just kind of my thing. I'd take, movie players apart, and with TVs I would dismantle a lot of stuff, and then I'd love to just see the inner workings of it. Putting it together was a different story. I did that most of the time, but sometimes things are complicated. But I always love to see how it works. I love how it's made. I love to see how these shorts were originally made and produced, and the struggles that made them great, which is because whenever people talk about, and I've said this multiple times in multiple platforms, Disney failed a lot. He did, but he kept getting back up. And to say that he didn't, which the family likes to do, and they hate to talk about the strikes, because there's a great book called The Disney Revolt by Friedman, and it's about the Disney strikes. And that was an ugly spot in his legacy that nobody at Disney likes to talk about. They don't let their biographers talk about it, really. You're on your own if you want to write about that. When Magoo flew, it's about UPA cartoons and how innovative they were. But with UPA, Disney fired them for unionizing during the strike, and they created UPA, and later he tried to ruin their careers by calling them communists. And it really, he was an FBI spook, which was really bad. So there's a lot of dark things about Disney's history, but a lot of that created some of the most beautiful work,
Yeah,
and that's part of it. And the more you take away from someone's struggle, the more you take away from their success, because throughout all of that, he still put out good product. His people put out good product, and then they went out, many of them, and created their own studios. The people that he fired because they unionized, they created UPA. And they created other companies that created great cartoons. Like UPA created Mr. Magoo, and a lot of that 60s stuff, and Oscar award-winning shorts that were because he fired them.
Yeah.
So I mean, either way, good or bad, a lot of it has to do with him. He's like the godfather of a lot of animation in other studios, and he made them better. And they did the same to him. Like I'd like to talk about the Fleshers at one point, because Max and Dave Flesher were direct competitors. They did the Popeye cartoons, which were like ground level New York cartoons, where everything was rough, but it was clean and it was innovative, and they were great innovators. And Walt Disney benefited from their trials and their errors. There were things that they created the Superman cartoons in the 40s, which are what Batman the Animated Series and Superman were based on. So they created all that, and it was because of their competition with Disney. And they did it different, but they did things like Betty Boop. They created Betty Boop and did all that. So Disney had his hand in everything, whether he realized it or not. And good, bad, or indifferent, I want to talk about it, because it's fascinating, the history behind this. That's why I always loved cartoons, and the more I learned about them, not just as a kid, but as an adult, and with all the books and all the information, it's amazing. It's such a world that goes untapped when it comes to its history and its inner workings. It's fascinating.
Oh, it is. And there's so much to talk about with the different, like you said, different companies, different genres.
Eras.
The eras, yeah. And we'll probably, as we go along, dive into individual cartoons like we
will.
Yeah. And then also, just like you said, maybe production studios, writers, or cartoonists, because
it's such a huge world.
It is, and it spawns so many things. And like, for instance, like something like trivial, like for me, like my name's Todd for one reason. My mom liked Fox and the Hound.
Oh, yeah.
And because originally I was supposed to be Ralph Jr. or Ryan.
Fox and the Hound was 81. Yeah, right?
No, it was 80.
Oh, it was 80.
It was 1980.
It was 80.
So it happened a couple months before I was born. And or it was either that or she heard about it or something. So I think it was prior to me being born in 80. Mm-hmm. And so she either saw the movie or knew the story, and she was like, I've always liked the name Todd. And watching that movie, to me personally, it gives me the feels.
Yeah.
Because I have that, connection, and then also the story is fantastic. I think that's one of those movies that is overlooked by a lot of Disney fans. It's not in the favorites, or it's not a classic, and to me, it's not rated a classic anyway that I know of.
Well, it was Kurt Russell, right?
Yeah.
I remember that.
That was a fantastic movie. Hated the sequel.
Yeah,
but
right. Disney. Yeah, that's another episode will be dedicated to the Disney sequels and why they stopped doing them in the 90s.
They're all, this movie was done 20 years ago. Sequel.
They had that for a while. It was like the 90s were crazy for that. But then when Iger, I think, took over, it's like no more of that.
That was one stain I'll put on Eisner. I liked Eisner a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, when they were trying to do like Lion King 2, Aladdin 2,
and 3. No, there's a lot of that, but I also want to talk about Eisner and Jim Henson. Because the attempted purchase in 1990, which kind of, Jim Henson never got mad, period. That was his character. He got pissed off at Bob. And it had to do with Sesame Street. But we'll talk about that the next time, because there's so much we'll do. There's going to be episodes coming where we talk about a lot of stuff. Please, we hope you enjoy this. Please let us know in the comments what you think, your favorite shorts, your favorite shows, things you think people forgot about, because let's face it, a lot of times people do forget about it. If you remember KCAL kids, if you are a KCAL kid, or we're a fan,
let us know.
Somehow let us know. Please like, share, and subscribe. But there's going to be way more of this coming.
I can't wait. This is right up my alley, dude.
Yeah, me too. We can just obviously kind of talk about this forever. But yeah, we're going to get into some deep dives in a lot of this, because it's a big world that goes mainly ignored and forgotten. And we're not going to let that happen. But
no, we're not.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Tye Justice.
Todd Fox.
This is TNT, the KCAL Kids, signing off till next time.